topic is challenging because the range is very wide. One can take an entirely philosophical approach and just talk about it purely as an academic pursuit, or one can also talk about it totally as a topic that's close to our hearts, especially for some of us who may have been hurting before or hurting currently due to something that has happened in our lives. Right, so tonight we will have both. All right, we have a little bit of both. And how this session will be conducted is I'll speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then I'll open up for a time of breakout rooms so that y'all can concretize your questions and prayer if needed. And then we will meet back for Q&A for the last 20 minutes so that we can go through some final questions together using the flow. All right, but before we go further, let us pray. Father Lord, we just want to pray for each and every person who is here this evening. We are here for various reasons. And, primarily, we are here because you have ordained our presence. So, Father, we just want to pray that your Spirit will move gently, powerfully, and personally in our midst. That as we contemplate your words, as we contemplate your thoughts and feel the way you feel towards us, we may catch a glimpse of your glory and may bring contentment and satisfaction and healing to our souls. So we bless your name and we commit this time to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I'm going to share with you some very simple thoughts tonight, and you can then ask the questions. What do we do as Christians when bad or evil things happen? Especially because in Christianity, we believe in a God who is good and all-powerful. So if God is good and if he is all-powerful, why doesn't he exert his power to stop it? If God is all good, why is there evil? How can even bad things happen if a God who is all good created a universe in the first place, right? So the first question that we may want to ponder over is, does evil necessarily need to be created? So let's talk about who God is first. Christianity posits a God who is love, a God who is intensely relational, and a God who is holy. Why there is a need to have a God who is holy and love is because without holiness, love cannot be sustained. If you just think carefully, you may remember a time that somebody cheated you, all right, and it hurt, didn't it? So when there is a lack of holiness, perfect love cannot be sustained. So perfect love is only possible when there is a source that is perfectly holy. Having understood that concept, that God is love, when he created us, he then gave us a degree of choice. Because if there is no choice at all, then you would find that there is no possibility of love because we are robotic or we are robots. However, I'd like to stress that the choice that God gives to us exists only within certain parameters. We do not, for example, have a choice over who our parents are, but we can exert our choice on which university we want to apply to. Whether the university accept us or not is a different question, but we have at least a choice to where we want to apply to. And so this tells us that God, who is the God of love, created us for a love relationship with him and also gives us the opportunity to experience love one to another. And for love to flourish, there must be some degree of choice, otherwise we are robots. And once there is a degree of choice, the possibility of evil and bad things begin to emerge. Because if God were to stop every single bad act before something bad happens, it would mean that there is no choice at all. How far God allows evil to take place is debatable both in the history of man as well as an individual experience. But at this point, I just want you to consider The fact that if there was no possibility of evil, all right, I'm not saying that God is evil, but I'm saying that if there's no possibility of evil, then there cannot be any degree of choice. And if there was totally no choice, then there cannot be love. The second thing has got to do with our expectations. You know, what is it that we are expecting in a fallen world? Christianity is quite clear in the sense that God made us in innocent perfection. When Adam and Eve was first created, they were not totally perfect in the sense of they are flawless to the point that they will never make a wrong choice. All right, but they had what we call innocent perfection. All right. And with innocent perfection comes a love relationship which led to a choice that they made, which was no good. And humanity and the universe was therefore fallen. So in a fallen universe, we can expect certain things. We can expect pain. We can expect sickness. We can expect evil due to bad choices. We can expect that things may not always go according to how we wish it would be. And there is a certain natural process that flows out of the fact that we live in a fallen world. So we do need to ask ourselves whether our expectations of someone who lives in a fallen world are reasonable and realistic, because some of us basically expect that life will always be good, that and we are shocked when bad things happen. So for example, the recent incident where a student was killed in River Valley School, a lot of us expressed that we are shocked. But if we think carefully, actually the Bible tells us that bad things can happen. And if we look at how things have been going in the world, we need to be asking ourselves, why are we shocked? Instead, we need to be people who are prayerfully humble, that things can really change. A car accident can change the course of our life. A bad choice made in the course of bungee jumping, if someone didn't do the ropes properly, can cause very significant injury. And so we need to be humbly prayerful as we go along. So tonight, I'm just going to share with you 4 perspectives of how bad things or evil can happen. All right. And if you look at this diagram, you'll find that you can really look at it in different ways. Okay, I am fascinated by diagrams like these. You can find it easily on the internet. All right. So looking at things from God's point of view, the first principle that I'd like to share with you tonight is God's fairness is expressed from eternity to eternity. In other words, for example, when we see that something happened, right? In 1 Kings chapter 14, I've shared this with some of you before. In 1 Kings chapter 14, verses 1 to 20, there was a young child who died. And this young child died because he was actually the child of a very evil king, all right? And God has said that he's going to punish this family because this family was really evil. And this young child was the only one he found anything good existing in this entire family. And so God chose to let this child die and his body be buried, whereas the rest was going to be punished with a death that was more gruesome, without a body that was going to be preserved at the end of the day. So in other words, this young child in 1 Kings chapter 14 died early because God had ordained the death and said that, okay, it's enough. Okay, I'm going to punish this whole household for the evil that they are wreaking upon the people of God. And because this child has been good, so I'm going to take him away early. From a human point of view, all right, we will say, oh my goodness, this person died very early. How can it be? How can it be something good? But yet from God's point of view, he has seen that this child was going to grow up in a very evil environment. And because the punishment that he has set for the entire household has arrived, he wanted to preserve this child and brought this child to himself. Genesis 15:16 is interesting in the sense that this was a few hundred years before the Exodus account when Moses brought the Israelites out of Egypt towards the promised land. And it is said that when Moses began the conquest of the promised land, he brought a lot of destructions to the Amorites, the Ammonites, and all the knights that you can think of in the promised land. And if you look at Genesis 15:16, you'll find that a few hundred years prior to that event, God said something interesting, that the full measure of the sin of these inhabitants had not reached the full measure. In other words, what God is saying is, I'm going to give these people time. And he gave them a few hundred years. All right. And he knows in his sovereignty that their sins are going to pile up. And at some point, an intervention needs to take place. And so Moses started the conquest of the promised land. In other words, when we look at fairness and whether something is good or bad, we tend to look at it only from our point of view. But here, what God is saying is that, okay, I look at you as an individual, right? The child, right, was precious in God's eyes. I also look at you as a group, all right, a communal view of life, where because the child's family was evil, they needed to be punished. Because certain inhabitants of the land were evil, the evil had to be arrested, and so God intervened. All right, so God's fairness is expressed from eternity to eternity. It's not bound by the fact that our life is going to come to an end. All right. In fact, death can be an expression of God's love for us. The second perspective I'd like to share with you is the human experience is, from God's point of view, is individual in responsibility, but communal in expression. I'd like to share two passages with you, one from Ezekiel chapter 18. Okay, Ezekiel chapter 18 verse 20 is very simple and clear. Each man will die for his sins and not for his father's sin. In other words, if I do something wrong, God eventually, however the form may be, will hold me personally accountable. All right. Therein lies this sentence that the human experience is individual in terms of the responsibility that we bear before God for the bad stuff that we do. Okay, but it's communal in experience. You may remember the Exodus account that is very famous, right? It has been made in movies even, and it's written for us and recorded for us in Exodus chapter 1 to 12, where there was a fairly evil king, Pharaoh, who was trying to enslave the nation of Israel. And so all the Israelites were really struggling under his rule. And eventually Moses brought them out using the 10 plagues, okay, that God gave. And in the 10 miraculous plagues, what you can see is basically a cycle whereby Pharaoh hardened his own heart, and then God also hardened Pharaoh's heart. A question then may be said, if God also hardened his heart, how can you blame him? All right. In Hebraic thought, it's quite interesting in the sense that the hardening refers to a strengthening of the will. So if you read the text, you'll find that in the first few plagues, Pharaoh hardened his own heart, and then its subsequent ones, or more or less alternating, God hardened his heart, then Pharaoh hardened his heart. In other words, God's spirit strengthens the will of a man. Once we kind of begin the process, and Pharaoh had a few plagues to start out with, and there was no repentance, eventually God will always strengthen our will, either for courage or for destruction, once we cross a certain point. Because when we are evil, there's collateral damage. For example, if I do something really bad, I decide to go drunk driving, I may end up knocking down someone who is totally innocent. And at some point, okay, we don't know what that point is, God intervenes, all right? And this is where we need to grapple with the fact that when there was choice, it means that our choices, all right, can affect other people. Like if I'm drunken and I'm driving and I go a little bit crazy on the road, I can knock down someone else, all right? And so even in the Exodus account, you will find that there could have been relatively innocent children, or there could have been relatively innocent farmers who were just trying to make the ends meet. But yet, as a result of 10 plagues, they also suffered, even though it was Pharaoh who was primarily responsible for the evil that was being wreaked upon the Israelites. So because of that element of choice doesn't exist in a vacuum. Choice fleshes out the interrelational nature of how one man relates with another. And so therefore, when there is choice, you will find that evil and bad things can happen as a communal experience. But the assurance from scripture is that responsibility before God, who is all wise and all good, he holds us individually accountable. So that's the second perspective that I'd like to share with you. For first perspective, God's fairness doesn't just exist in our lifetime, it's from eternity to eternity. The second one is he holds us individually responsible, but the experience of good and bad is communal in nature. The third perspective I'd like to share with you is some people ask, if I have an illness or if I'm suffering, is it always because of my sin? I've given you two passages, one in John chapter 5 and one in John chapter 9. Okay, basically in John chapter 5, there was a person who was unwell and sick, and it was directly attributable to sin because Jesus healed him and Jesus said, go and sin no more. In John 9, however, it's an interesting story whereby a person needed healing and Jesus healed him. But Jesus was very clear by stating that the illness was not due to sin. In other words, it was not due directly to sin, but the illness happened as a result of the fact that we live in a fallen world. And now Jesus was going to heal him and in so doing show forth his glory. Okay, so even in suffering can be traced back to original sin in the fact that, in the sense that we live in a fallen world, it can be the result of our personal sin. For example, if I have many sexual partners, I may get HIV. But it need not always be directly attributable to our own personal sin, because sometimes God is going to use that situation, that illness, or whatever that circumstance may be, to show forth his glory and to show forth the solution that he wants to bring upon this ailing world. Okay, the last perspective that I would like to share with you is this. So when we summarize everything together, all right, we realize that because of who God is, he's a God of love, he's God of holiness, there's such a thing as right and wrong, there's such a thing as what is best versus better versus just good. And because of choice that was created as a natural consequence of the fact that our God is a relational God who wants to give us the possibility of love. All right, there's choice. With choice comes evil and the possibility of evil. All right, so we can be victims. We can also be observers. Sometimes something happens to someone else and we see evil. All right, but at the end of it all, to whatever degree that we understand of our circumstances, we are also invited to be a part of a solution, just like what happened in John chapter 9, and to experience him. So if we had suffered before in our lives as a result of a bad incident that was totally out of our control, we can actually be part of a solution and we can begin to experience him. Okay, and I'm just going to end this with a simple example. You will find that some of our youths, all right, may struggle to get into a university course of their choice. Some of us may struggle to get into the job that we want. And that can bring a lot of discouragement to us. We may not get into the stream that we want in school, we may not get the subjects that we want, and so on and so forth. All right. And to us, that is a bad thing. If God is so good and I've been working hard, why doesn't he give me the results that I have been longing for, despite my best efforts? If you haven't been studying hard, there's a different conversation. But if despite my best efforts, I cannot get what I want, then why is God allowing that? But when we look at things from a bigger point of view, all right, I just wanted to share with you two interesting perspectives. One is that there are many people in the world, all right, who come from a different country in a different world whereby there are not many opportunities, right? If you go to India and China, every year there are many students who are going through the same thing. You imagine that now you're going through a difficulty where you're not getting what you want, all right? You're not getting what you want. If you allow yourself to experience God during this time, you are going to be a very powerful witness to the many millions of students in this world who never even got the opportunity to try to get what they want. And there's a very powerful message where we're invited to be part of the solution and also to experience him. So if we can just set aside, okay, the relatively petty Singaporean goals, all right, of just simply trying to get ahead of the neighbor next to us and show that we are good in this relatively meaningless pursuit, and we think of things in a longer term, I assure you that a life that is lived hidden in Christ is very meaningful. Second thing that I want to share with you as we close with this summary is this. And I shared this with some of the adults last evening, that when we interview candidates, all right, and if I have two candidates and all things being equal, sometimes I will ask them, what is your response to disappointment? Those who can articulate how they responded to disappointment, if all else being equal, I will usually personally prefer that candidate, because I know that that person can handle failure. Because once you go into life, you will realize that something somewhere at some point will happen. All right. If we have had minimal disappointments in our life, it's truly only by the grace and the blessing of God, who has chosen to bless us in a peculiar way. All right. But for those of us who have recovered from some pain and issues or disappointment, you will find that the doors that open are really better, because we have grown to be resilient. We have also grown to appreciate more deeply the possibility of how God willingly suffered so that we may experience him deeply. Our suffering is almost always involuntary, but our God suffered voluntarily in order that as we mourn, as we grieve over our losses, we may be comforted by him, and in so doing, comfort others as well. All right, so 4 simple perspectives that I'm sharing with you tonight. Number 1, God's fairness is expressed from eternity to eternity, is not limited by our lifetime. Number 2, we have to bear individual responsibility for our sin, but we need to be mindful that suffering can be communal in experience. All right. Thirdly, even in suffering can be traced back ultimately to sin, but it may or may not be the direct consequence of our personal sin. And finally, for some of us, at some point, we may be victims, we could be observers, but at the end of the day, may I invite you to focus on God and allow yourself to be invited to be a part of the solution and experience him. Okay, I'm going to stop here.
Okay, so I can share the Slido now.
Okay, we are going to have some breakout rooms for discussions. All right. So I've asked Jang to split you up into the breakout rooms so you can discuss with either David, Tao-En, or Terry. All right. And then the adults can stay on in this main room for the next 20 minutes so that you can tighten up the questions. And then after that, we have the Q&A. Okay.
Oh, so we're going to breakout rooms first, right?
Yeah, we're going to breakout rooms first.
All right, cool.
So,
Okay.
leave the adults behind and then split the rest into the 3 rooms. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Jang.
Yeah, no problem. I'll go open all the rooms now. Y'all can just join. Wait, is Meilu an adult? It doesn't sound like a youth, eh?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Just leave here. Yeah.
Wait. I'll move her back here. Okay, cool. If there's any problems, actually, personally, you want me to stay here or
Up to you. You can feel free to join a room as well. Yeah.
okay, actually, I think I'll just give you host lah. Then you can like control the breakout rooms also, I think.
I think as a co-host, I can. Yeah.
Oh,
No
you can?
problem.
Okay, nice,
Yeah,
nice. That is
good
fine.
enough. Yeah.
All right, I'll go hop into someone's breakout room.
Okay.
Bye bye.
For the rest who are here, would you like to open your screen so I can see who you are? Yeah. If you can, if it's convenient. Yeah. Hi. Okay, so for the parents, I've asked you all to stay behind because I thought while we're waiting for the young ones to consolidate their questions, I thought I'll just open this time. If you have difficulty talking to your children about some of these questions and you want to raise it for discussion here, you may, and then if I can, I'll share with you some of my thoughts. Yeah. And of course, feel free to share your thoughts as well. Yeah. Okay, any questions or things that you're curious about? Yeah. Yes.
Sounds like we are all good, man.
Sounds like you're all good.
But Melvin side looks like want to say something, is it? But you're muted, eh?
Well, nothing. Just chit chat lah, huh?
Okay, yeah. We wait 20 minutes for the young ones. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, we can just chit chat. Yeah.
yeah. Seeing our children finding their faith is one of the journey as a parent.
Yes. Sorry, come again.
Yeah, our children is all around.
Oh, your children.
Yeah. Come and have a look.
Can stick your head.
Pastor Liang Wei is here. Uncle Song Yao is here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's important though, as we go along, is when our kids are growing up, as Christian parents, sometimes we can get very excited. For example, recently, my 6-year-old says, Daddy, I want to get baptized already. So, of course, as a Christian parent, we get very excited. I grew up in a non-Christian family, but as a Christian parent, if my daughter even vaguely shows a bit of interest in reading the Bible, I straight away buy 1, 2, and sometimes even 3 Bibles, something like that. Whereas last time, as a first generation Christian, wow, my first Bible was I had to save by the coins in order to go and buy the Bible, right? It's so different, right? And that's not, I'm not trying to encourage you to torture your kids in order that they may experience what we experience. That's not my point. Okay, but the point is our kids will need more space for exploration. And this is something that is very important. And we cannot close down that space of exploration by our enthusiasm. So for example, if our child says, I want to serve in youth ministry, of course, great, because serving is one way that we experience God. So great. But we need to then defend that space rather than keep just urging that person to serve. By defending that space, it means, okay, son or daughter, you're beginning to stand in front of youth ministry and say, I believe in God. Is it because you feel pressurized to say that? And we should be careful about making statements, doctrinal statements like the entire Bible is the word of God. Do you believe it? I'm not saying that that statement is wrong. I believe that the Bible is the word of God, but our poor teenager hasn't read the whole Bible. There's no real need to force them into a corner to make a strong doctrinal position. In fact, some of the parents who push such strong doctrinal positions, sometimes I'm a bit naughty. I ask the parent, have you yourself read the entire Bible? And if your answer is no, why are you pushing it down to your kids? You know what I'm saying? So as our kids grow, number one, don't get too excited when they show when they show a desire for spirituality. We encourage prayerfully and humbly. When they start making firm statements, along the way we pray and we clarify with them. Because once we get overly excited and concretize them too much, you will find that they make statements because of the public persona of who they are in church or youth ministry. And then when they get to university or they go overseas, they can crash dramatically. So that will be one of the take-home points I'd like to share with the parents today, especially in regards to what you shared earlier about how we are excited about our children. And like I said, I fully understand those sentiments. They read a page of scripture, I want to buy 3 Bibles already. Yeah. Okay, so that would be my first response for your consideration. Yeah. Okay, any other thoughts?
Yeah. So, my boy is 13, Timothy. So far, I think he's doing okay. Just didn't want to stress and ask him too many questions. But again, when I compare him to, let's say, myself, right? 13 years old, I wasn't a believer yet. So in that sense, I feel the Sunday school, right, is really, and of course, and now youth is a good. It's a good place for good influence, right? And then of course, it's important to build also friendship, So it's also important not just about doctrine, but the people around them, and they can grow up with, right? So it helps to be in the church environment.
Yep.
So not overly concerned. It's just that if there is any concern, is about what do the youth when they come together? What do they do? Do they talk more about God, or to challenge each other, right? Or ask questions, or do they actually play more games on their devices, right?
Yep.
Or if there are games, then can it would be nice also if somebody could also break into some question and just encourage them, right, to just look to God more in the community.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I really echo the sentiments. So for example, let's take the first sentiment that you shared. Okay, the first sentiment that you shared was friendship is very important. So when it comes to friendship, very important, we need to always keep that in mind, what you shared, that friendship is very important. So whenever we try to communicate truth with them, we need to remember the importance of friendship. For example, if I ask all of us who are parents, most of us in our 40s, 50s, and so on and so forth, how many LGBTQ friends you have who are close friends? You can probably count with maybe 1 hand or 2 hands, unless you are more into ministry, all right? In our time, it was not so common, all right, to know friends, maybe they're hidden, whatever, but we don't really interact too much on the topic. Imagine if you brought your golfing buddy to church, okay, and the first thing I say to the golfing buddy when he visits church, and I tell him, you must cut off golf. Okay, you must cut off golf because you're addicted to golf. You must cut off golf before you can join the church. I assure you, many adults in church will be very angry with me. I'll probably be getting angry emails and letters and my phone will probably explode. But when we talk to our children, we adopt a very different stance. We are like, oh, you must be very careful. Your friend is horrible. There's this LGBTQ. We slam on them like a sledgehammer. But don't forget, our younger ones, most of them will have quite a lot of LGBTQ friends, and some of them are pretty close friends. So in that sense, we need to show a greater degree of sensitivity. We don't have to adopt their stance, but we need to show that we are sensitive and we are open to helping them come alongside to build strong friendships, just with the same sensitivity that we share with the golfing buddies. All right, so be very aware of the importance of friendship. We tend to be a little bit harsher because very few of us have friends that struggle with the same issues, and so we kind of react more than we necessarily do out of fear rather than out of a genuine love and assurance in God. So remember the friendship element that Benedict mentioned earlier. The second thing is the way that we deal with our concerns about addictions. Benedict mentioned computer games, and this is very common. I have many parents over the years. My child is playing a lot of computer games. I've been telling him, no, I pull this plug, pull that plug, and that kind of thing, and they still want to play computer games. I'm afraid that they are getting addicted. And I scold them, scream at them, and use language that's best not shared over the pulpit, and no change. And I'm getting angry, they are getting angry, everybody's getting angry, something like that. So from computer games to anger to bitterness to whatever, right? And then after a while, father says, never mind, let them play. Mother says cannot play. Then the parents end up quarreling as well, so the problem actually escalates, right? I'd like to share with you a slightly different perspective. Number one, it's perfectly okay to challenge your kids if you think that they are getting addicted to something bad, because when they don't have structures, they get very uncomfortable. When we're too free and we don't dare to say, we sometimes as a parent can feel blackmailed by our kids because we are scared that they withdraw from us, so we don't say anything. All right, so I just want to assure you it's okay to say something. Okay, the next thing is, how then do we say it? I think Matthew has the Gospel of Matthew has very good guidelines. Okay, don't judge. Okay, but take the log out of the plank out of our own eye before we go and remove the speck in our children's eye. That passage can actually be applied to our children. The passage is generic. I know we don't like to apply it to our children, but if you look at the passage, it's actually applicable. Take the log out of our own eyes before we try to take the speck out of our children's eye. For example, if you have a rich man in Mount Carmel BP Church who every weekend is playing golf at SICC, very few of us will go to rich, distinguished man and say, brother, you're addicted. You need to stop your addiction. Why? Because rich, successful, and distinguished. But when we see our children in front of a computer who is addicted, we are very harsh on them. So talk to your children with the same gentleness as you would talk to the rich man playing golf in SIC. Number one. Second thing is, as an adult, we have our addictions. Yeah, we play a nice golf game, and then we think that it's not addiction. All right. I'm not saying that playing golf is wrong. Okay, there are Christian people who play very good golf and competitively and so on and so forth. But our hearts can also be drawn to golf, just like our kids can be drawn to esports, right? And we don't realize that we are addicted. If we come to them and say, Daddy today is beginning to realize I'm spending too many hours on golf. In fact, I think I may be worse than you. I am addicted to golf. And then after I spend many hours in the golf game, I come home, I realize I'm logging onto the computer and searching out golf equipment. So I actually have two addictions, but I think you only have one. You're only addicted to computer. I'm addicted to golf plus computer. And now that I've been convicted by God that I have two addictions compared to your one, I'm going to be asking God to help me. And then I want you to just look at how I live and see how God, lift me up from my addiction. And when you see the quality of my life improve, maybe you can think about your computer. You see, I'm still asking you to challenge your children, but follow the Bible. The Bible teaches us to judge and remove that speck from the eye only after we remove the plank from our eye. Okay, so the two thoughts that Benedict shared earlier, which is friendship, and then the second one is on computer games. All right. These are some of the perspectives that I'd like you to consider as a parent, or even as a ministry leader, or whatever we are in church, whatever sphere of influence we have, the way that we handle our young people, in the way that we communicate with them. Then I think you get some mileage. At the end of the day, it's not our burden to make sure our kids walk into the kingdom of God. That's their decision with the Lord. But we can look at how we can follow the Bible faithfully and allow the Spirit to fill us and challenge their generation powerfully and personally after we allow the Spirit of God to challenge us personally, powerfully, and deeply with His word.
So take on from what Pastor Liang Wei said, actually a lot of time, God really challenges us as parents through the behaviors of our children. So it's the same when we challenge them, right, to have self-control. It's the same that challenge us to have patience and grace. So it's a learning journey. So how many times they push the button, then will I react? Yeah. Is it 10 times or is it 1,000 times? So yeah, this is also my learning journey as a parent, where when I say that my Father in heaven is faithful, yeah, and love me no matter what. So am I going to love my children no matter what? So the same thing when we challenge our children in their behavior, God also uses them to challenge us.
Yeah, recently my daughter asked me, Daddy, you're always asking me to spend time with you, I don't always see you enjoying spending time with your father. I was like, I'm trying to spend time with you, bring you go and eat, take time from my schedule to bring you out, like that. Also gonna work by you. That was my first response. Okay. I was like, I'm just trying to do something nice for you, also gonna work. Wow, very young, but so the first 5 seconds, I was like, wow, my father really sway. After 5 seconds, so some leftover spirituality from the morning quiet time in the bed. So I just acknowledged to her that yeah, you are right. I think I need to think a little bit more carefully about what you said. Okay. So I think that is very important. I think another thing that we don't really talk about too much in church is, while we often talk about forgiveness in church, we don't talk about forgiving people who are close to us. And I just want to share with you 3 areas of forgiveness we seldom explore. Firstly is we seldom talk about forgiving our spouse. When our children see us being willing to forgive close people, spouse and parents, they see the power of forgiveness. All right, then they also grow to be a bit more forgiving about us. All right. The second is the narrative, especially sometimes I think it's especially hard for the mothers. From young you always sing songs, 世上只有妈妈好, and it's a nice song, but it's a song that in a sense pressurizes the women to always be a good mother, and sometimes there may be days where you simply hate your kids. All right. And very hard to say, I think as a woman, very hard to go to church and say, wow, today really I want to just hammer my kids. Because from young you're saying 世上只有妈妈好, so it's very hard. So can I also encourage you to, if there are seasons in your life where you harbor bitterness against your kids, maybe it's a career you have given up, maybe it's a choice that you have made for the sake of your child and yet it's not appreciated, unnoticed by both your child, your husband, and you struggle to believe that that choice is noticed by God, whatever it may be. Can I encourage you to consider releasing that that kind of forgiveness? The third thing is our relationships with our fellow Christians. At the end of the day, why should our kids come to church? If they see that we practice a very powerful form of reconciliation in church, it will be a very powerful testimony, because in the world out there, as they grow older, as you know, reconciliation is something that is hard to come by, but it's very tangible. So if they can see in church a model of reconciliation, I'm not going to say that church has no problems. Anybody who has been Christian for a while will know that church has problems, lots of problems. Pastor can be the problem. Sometimes, the church can give me problem, I can give the church problem, whatever it may be. I just want to encourage you that reconciliation is very important. Yeah, Jang, you can bring the people back. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll give them like 3 minutes to wrap up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to encourage the parents who are here, those of us who are older and you may not be a parent, that the way we reconcile is a very powerful testimony, because reconciliation with fellow Christians is a posture of humility before God and before each other.
Just realized I didn't teach my son that 世上只有妈妈好 that song.
Tell your wife to say thank you to you.
I stopped teaching them. So I think it's only our generation may have done that. Okay.
I remember this sister from another church many years ago. I say, the last place I can say I hate my kids is the church. Yeah. And she's not a hateful woman. Yeah. It's just a woman who has given up her career for the kids, and yeah. And the kids' lack of spirituality and success in the world becomes the woman's KPI. I've given up so much, and yet they have not done well. Yeah, can be very tough. Yeah. So freely we have received from God, freely give, and where we struggle, let's be open to acknowledge that. Okay, welcome back. We can do the Slido. Anything interesting happened during your sessions, we can floor it for discussion. Feel free to chime in for those who would like to share perspective, no problems at all.
Okay, can y'all see the Slido?
Yeah, we can.
Nice, nice. So, hey guys, y'all can like upvote stuff like by pressing the like button on the right. But if like no one has any preference, then we can like start with the first one or
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just give you a minute to upvote whatever that you want to upvote. Okay, Judas is quite popular. Pharaoh is quite popular. Okay, I'm just going to start. All right. Judas was chosen to betray Jesus. Was he predestined to sin, and is his punishment fair? All right. There are a few thoughts about that. Number one, just because God had made a decision that someone is going to be punished doesn't necessarily make it unfair. Okay, and the reason is this. I give an example. I have two daughters. All right. Let's say I got $100 million. I don't, but let's say I have $100 million. And then my two daughters grew up with me over 20, 30 years. And one day I'm going to die. I'm going to write my will. Okay, and I write in my will that one daughter is going to get 99.9999999 million. And the second daughter is just going to get a 10-cent coin as a memento of my love for her. Okay. You may say that is unfair because they are both my daughters. But we technically can't say that because you don't know the reasons why I made that decision. Okay. So in order to assess whether a decision was fair or unfair, we actually need to know the grounds of the decision. And in the concept of predestination, we don't actually know the grounds, and God did not oblige himself to explain the grounds for every single situation. sometimes for example, in the story in First Kings, there is a hint of why he made a decision, but very often he doesn't. And if you think about it, I mean, there are some people in Mount Carmel who hold very fairly senior positions in the corporate world. All right, you don't always explain your decisions to every single employee. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. As a person on top, you try your best to do so, but there are just situations whereby you can't, because sometimes the gap can be too wide. I remember when I bring my young child for vaccination, just hold down and jab. I don't tell baby Ariana, the vaccine is going to stimulate a powerful immune response, which is going to chase away all bacteria, according to the cell types of number of types of pneumococcal bacteria, something like that. I don't, because she is not old enough to accept or retain that kind of information. And so there is that gap between God and man. God has not obligated himself. So we need to be careful when we say that just because God made a choice that someone should be punished, it means that God is unfair, because we do not have full access to the grounds for God's decision. All right. Whether Judas was specifically chosen or not is also debatable. All right. That would be my second point, because you can see that Jesus actually gave him quite a lot of opportunity to turn around. All right. And it seems that there was some sense that someone close, if you look at the Old Testament literature, the point that the Old Testament Old Testament literature was making was that someone close to Jesus will betray him. But need it necessarily have been Judas? Right? The Old Testament, as far as I know, did not specify that it must be Judas. All right. The decision was that the enormity and the seriousness of sin was going to be expressed through a deep betrayer. And so because of those 2 points, I'll be careful to say that just because Judas is going to be punished, that is necessarily going to be unfair. All right. I still don't really understand the Pharaoh thing. God hardened his heart. So doesn't that technically mean that God pushed him to sin more? Okay, this is going to be a little bit more complex. All right. For example, if you hear a story like a father who sexually assaults his daughter, all right, one of the questions that arise in our hearts will be, why didn't God stop him? Okay, why didn't God stop him from harming an innocent girl? We briefly mentioned that during the talk, that choice is needed, and for choice to be real, some degree of latitude has to be given. Otherwise, choice is not real. However, God in his kindness does limit the extent of evil. That's also a concept that is present in the Bible. So how does God limit that concept of evil? He can remove that person by causing that person to die. He can bring about circumstances that leads to liberation, for example, in the Exodus account. So it does seem that as we commit ourselves to sin, so if you look at the 10 plagues, the first 5 plagues, essentially what you have, and the first 5 plagues are pretty serious, but that wasn't insufficient to turn Pharaoh around. And then from the 6th plague onwards, you begin to see this pattern of God hardening Pharaoh's heart and Pharaoh hardening his own heart. And like I said earlier in the talk, the Hebraic concept is that God strengthens the will. So if you look at, rather than harden the heart towards sin, God simply strengthens the will. So the Pharaoh actually had 5 plagues to consider carefully what he wants to do with his nation and how he wants to make decisions. If he had decided to turn earlier, then that same Hebraic phrase that talks about hardening of the heart can actually refer to the strengthening of the will. Then perhaps it would have been a different situation. But if God is to limit evil, okay, if God is to limit the extent of evil, at some point God has to choose to act. And in this case, God chose to act by committing Pharaoh down that path. All right, so this should give us pause. I know it's a little bit different from the more common church diet that we are fed, sometimes because of dramatic anecdotal stories about how we deathbed conversions. And I agree that that can be real, because you have the thief on the cross. I mean, you have the robber on the cross who converted at the last minute, but never assume that, all right, when we are committing ourselves into a cause of evil, at some point, if we're so evil that God feels that there is a need to limit the extent of evil, then we might be ripening ourselves for judgment. Okay, so for those of us who, for whatever reason, beginning to make choices in that direction, I don't want to scare you by saying that there's no way out, but I would like to caution us that it's the fear of the Lord that's going to lead us to wisdom. So the extent of evil is an important consideration. Okay. Because non-Christians won't accept concepts like sovereignty. Sometimes I ask the non-Christians, okay? Sometimes I ask the non-Christian questions. Okay, sometimes I ask the non-Christian questions. For example, I may ask the non-Christian, what do you think the world will look like if God stopped every single act of evil at conception? That means I got very angry with Uncle Towen one day, and I lifted a cup and I'm gonna smash it on his head. Just before I smash it on his head, a divine hand comes down and catch my hand. If God does that every time we have an act of evil in our head, what kind of world would that be? Is that the kind of world that you think is necessarily better? Yeah. So and that leads us to this discussion that I shared with you earlier in the pyramid, of the fact that love needs to give some degree of choice, and some degree of choice needs to give the possibility of evil. Okay. So sometimes we ask questions and then ask them, do you have a better alternative? Okay. If your family member is going through suffering and both of you are faithful in God, if they lose the battle that they face, what is the significance in that loss? Okay. Sometimes we know the significance of the loss, and sometimes we don't. For example, my grandmother had a stroke. My grandmother actually had 2 strokes. For many years, I was praying for her salvation. At the first stroke, I prayed for her healing, and God really blessed her, and within a couple of months, she was back walking. Hallelujah, praise the Lord. The second time she had a stroke, I prayed even harder, but nothing happened, and eventually she deteriorated. But interestingly, it was at the second stroke that my grandmother committed her life to the Lord. So I don't know exactly what losing the battle you mean, okay? But I would say this. I have seen Christians go through incredible suffering. Okay, I had the privilege of working in some restricted access nations whereby Christians are badly persecuted. So I know on a first name basis friends who have gone to prison because they are Christians. I know on a first name basis people who have serious illnesses as a result of serving the Lord. I even have friends whom I cannot contact because they are serving the Lord in restricted access nations, and I don't know where they are and how they are doing. All right. And this is where that patient waiting can actually, in prayer, can bring great dividends. Because a lot of us are sold into this idea that if I pray for something, the fruit of that prayer must be in the outcome. I prayed for healing, the healing must happen. I prayed that my friend will be released from prison, he must be released from prison. We are very sold into that. But I like to say this, it's in that patient and humble waiting that you will realize that sometimes some of the greatest fruits in life can be born and cultivated. I realized that I've become less impulsive. as a person because God didn't answer a lot of my prayers. I've also realized that some of the prayers that I prayed, I remember praying that some of my friends would be released from prison. God didn't allow them to be released, but they ended up preaching the gospel while they were in prison. And the ministry grew and they came out as men who were strengthened in their faith. And so when we say that the outcome and doesn't match and they lose the battle, let's be very cautious and re-examine humbly before God the limitations of our perspective. Okay. The child in 1 Kings was good, so God pardoned him. The people were bad, so they were killed. But what about people who didn't do anything bad to deserve death? Okay, firstly, I just want to caution us. It's very easy for us to think that there are people who didn't do anything bad and are totally innocent. Very few of us are that way, if any at all. The Bible says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. You think of the most distinguished person you can think of in our church, and I can tell you he or she is a sinner. As your pastor, some of you may think that I'm a fairly good guy, but I'm telling you, I am a sinner. All right, so be very cautious about saying something like we didn't do anything bad to deserve death. Is that really true? Okay, so that's my first question. Is it really true? The second thing I'd like to share with you is, as a human, we tend to minimize the impact of our sin. It's just a little lie. It's just a little bit of favoritism. If you look at the Bible, for example, you find that Abraham, practiced some favoritism, right, as a parent. And look what it has done to the Israeli and Arab conflict. So we don't really know the full impact of our sins. Non-biblical example, it's just a little lunch. It's just an additional lunch. And the next thing you know, adultery happens and kids are hurt. All right. So be very cautious about this, because firstly, it's not true that we didn't do anything bad. And secondly, as a human, we almost always minimize the enormity of our sin, and we grossly underestimate the consequences and the ramifications of our sin. And we need to perhaps think a little bit more carefully about the fact that the reality may be that none of us deserve life, but any opportunity to be given life is really an act of grace by God. Okay. Okay, so I think the next one about God isn't fair, like only God knows what's fair. Yep, you're right. Okay, like I shared earlier, we don't know always the reasons why God made certain decisions. It is premature for us to decide whether it's fair or not. Okay, can you please elaborate more on innocent perfection? I don't really get how we are innocently perfect. Okay, I didn't say that we are innocently perfect. I said that Adam and Eve were innocently perfect. There's a bit of a difference there. All right, because when Adam was created, all right, at that time sin had not entered, so he was innocently perfect. All right. We are not innocently perfect. We are born in sin, as you rightfully pointed out. All right. And what I'm saying is that when Adam was created, sin hadn't tainted him yet. Okay, so in that sense, there was innocent perfection. All right. But because he didn't exert a choice to be born, he didn't exert a choice to be created, he didn't exert a choice to be good. All right. So in that sense, he was innocently perfect. But because he had a choice, he therefore within that boundaries and parameters of that choice, he can therefore perform evil. And as we all know, he subsequently did. Okay, so I just want to thank you for the opportunity to clarify that. Yeah, that's important. I'm not sure evolution of humans necessarily mean that it wasn't a literal story. All right. If you look at I think this might be a wider topic that we have to address at a later date, because we are thinking of doing Genesis next year. But I'm just going to make a few comments. Okay. Number one, even if we believe in the concept of theistic evolution, all right, it doesn't necessarily mean, all right, It doesn't necessarily, because even in the Genesis account, you'll find that men and women were created relatively late. So when we talk about theistic, that means God-driven, theistic evolution, what we're referring to is that God used the process of evolution to bring about this. And so sin coming into the world was not present at the moment of creation as a Kickstarter, if you like, as the spark that started the whole process. All right, but sin only entered at a particular point in time. So theistic evolution and the fact that sin entered the world need not necessarily be incompatible concepts, is basically what I'm saying. Right. Wouldn't an all-knowing God know that humans would sin against him and do harm to each other in his creation? So why did God still create humans and the first Adam? Well, you find that we don't exactly know why, but the story that tells us, but we can get a few clues, all right? We know that God is relational. So God created human beings to relate with him, knowing that they can harm things, all right? Just like when we have a child, okay? Most of us in Carmel who became parents chose to be parents. And if you had some degree of wisdom, you would know when you had that child that you're actually inviting pain into your life. Parenting is painful. Parenting has a lot of joys, but parenting, if you think that parenting is only joyful with zero pain, sorry to tell you, you're deceived. But in our desire for relationships, okay, you will find that there is a propensity to believe that the joy and the beauty, the sheer joy and beauty of relating with another can be so beautiful that we can exercise a choice to proceed with the process, even though we know that it is painful. Okay, the difference between Genesis and Revelation, where perfection truly comes, is that in Revelation, the last book of the Bible, what happens is that by then, God had made a choice to reconcile the entire world to himself. Those who then make a choice, he invites into his kingdom and he cements that decision. So those of us who are going to be with him for all eternity in Revelations, you will not sin against. That's the difference between the first Adam in Genesis and the perfection that we talk about in Revelation. That means once it's closed, once the matter is closed and we are preserved for all eternity, the possibility of sin won't happen again, because we have exercised our choice. God has exercised his choice and his initiative. We have exercised our choice, and God then seals that choice for all eternity. Okay, I'm going to pause here in case there's anybody who wants to make additional comments to the questions.
I have a question.
Yep.
Okay, so Pastor Liang Wei, you said that sin was created or introduced into a world during the time of human existence, right?
Yep.
So what about the natural disasters before humans existed? For example, like the stuff that wiped out all the dinosaurs, since natural disasters and destruction in the world are argued to be a cause of sin existing in the world.
Okay, the Bible doesn't actually explain why, but there can be some possibilities. All right. Number one, we think of things only purely in a linear fashion. All right, which means something happens. Okay, we think of sin is introduced today, and then the impact is therefore forward. You get what I mean? I sin today, and then impact is forward. Is there a possibility that the impact of sin is both forward as well as retrospective? That is one possibility. Okay, in other words, the impact and the effect of sin, because if you read the Genesis account, let's say you don't take a literal, perspective to it in terms of the fact that it is a linear timeline progression, what you're actually seeing in Genesis, if you take a more poetic approach, okay, I'm not saying the poetic approach is necessarily correct, But I'm just saying that if we take a more poetic approach, the basic understanding of Genesis 1 and 2 is that creation is working towards a human being that is formed in the likeness of God, who is going to be the one to steward the rest of the universe. And so when sin is introduced through this person who bears the image and the likeness of God, then the impact of sin can impact the entire universe. And is there a possibility that is both forward as well as backwards? That is possible. That would be one reason why you can actually have some flexibility in the way that we view creation. The second thing is this. When we talk about natural disasters, when we talk about earth shaking and all that kind of thing, is it necessarily a disaster? Because earlier on, when we referred to the First Kings passage, we said that death need not necessarily be equated with disaster. All right. So if we take a more literal approach to understanding of Genesis, is it then possible that the so-called disasters, earthquakes, and all that that happened prior to what we understand would have been the origin of man, all right, could simply be a process by which God was forming the universe? You understand what I'm saying? Because if we remove from our thinking the philosophical compass that anything that looks bad must therefore be bad, just like First Kings teach us that something that looks bad need not necessarily be bad, then we can actually see it possibly as a process by which is working towards the perfection, the innocent perfection of the first created man, followed by the impact that followed by the impact of the choices of the first created man. Am I making sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm not saying these are the answers, but I'm just saying that philosophically speaking, there are possibilities. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. Okay. Ken? Yeah, I think I briefly mentioned how a sin not occur in heaven. With non-Christians, like I say, I usually ask them questions, because don't always feel that you're the receiving end of having to provide answers. You know, we can also ask them legitimate questions that help them to probe further, you know. And I find that asking questions, this is what we call the balance of the weight of evidence, right? You're trying to help them balance the weight of evidence. If you say that there is no God, why is it only my burden of proof to prove to you that there is a God? You also need to show that no God, atheism can result in a universe where the material world exists and where there is love, relationship, and humanity, you know. So burden of proof needs to be fair, both sides. So that is often an approach that I take with non-Christians. The other thing, like I said, when we approach questions is let's be a little bit more careful, because let's say the question on suffering, you know, if someone asks me, why is there suffering in the world? I'll answer it very differently if I was in a Bible school or in a philosophy class versus if I'm with someone who just lost a loved one. Then the way that we answer may be very different. So this is where we really need to be leaning on the Spirit of God and asking the Spirit of God to guide us in the way that we respond to others. And I also want to comfort you. Don't stress yourself to always be able to provide the correct answers. There's some degree of trial and error. You get better at it. So I cannot promise you that I always give good answers, but I think if I were to comfort myself a little bit and I look back over 30 years of being a Christian, I think my answers are a little bit better than 30 years ago. So just keep walking, keep leaning on the Lord to guide you, and keep learning. Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to close here so that, because I think we have already exceeded the time somewhat, I'm just going to close here so that those who want to go can go, and then I'll just hang around in case there are a few who would like to interact a little bit more. Okay, so I'm just going to invite Uncle Terry to close us in prayer. Yeah.
Okay. Lord, thank you for this opportunity that we can come together to deal with this somewhat challenging and difficult issues that we face, even in our personal life. Even though we may not fully go away with everything that is being to be answered, we just trust that your wisdom will be continue to be given to each one of us as we ponder over the existence of evil and suffering that we see, especially those of us who experience it in our own life. We do not fully understand and know why it exists. Although what is mentioned in the Bible does give us some reason why we see some of this happening around us. But as it happens in our own life, it is sometimes hard for us to comprehend. But the only thing that we can rely on is you and the love that is unfailing. Help us, Lord, to continue to draw close to you and continue to keep our perspective on you, and to importantly know that whatever happens, things happen for a reason, and whatever that is unchanging, it is your love and your fact that you will continue to walk with us and to help us along in our journey here. I want to commit and give thanks to you for the opportunity, and also Pastor Liang Wei for helping us to understand these issues, and to ask that you release us with your blessings and give us the rest as we need for the next day. I want to commit this into your hands in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Just want to thank the team for putting this together, the Slido and the organization, as well as our 3 facilitators, Darren, Terry, and David. There will be some who perhaps have some questions. We will continue to be here, and then feel free to ask us outside of the session as well, so that we can continue to interact and pray together with you, especially if there's hurt and pain in your own lives. I also know that some of you may be asking some questions on conspiracy theories. We'll address that in 2 weeks' time. Yeah. Okay, sayonara. Okay, so I'll hang up. Those feel free to go off. Yeah.
Thank you, Pastor Liang Wei.
See you, Sabine. Hope you get your marking done.
Yeah, I'm gonna get back to it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye.
Okay. How y'all?
Okay, well, I was saying, glad you have the dinosaur question.
Yeah, I think we may do that in Genesis next year, but still discussing. Yeah.
Yes.
We're thinking of doing some blended learning, but still discussing. Yeah. For next year. So we don't get this disjointed approach to scripture. Yeah. See you, Vince. Yeah.
See you, Vince. Or you can ask questions if you want.
Bye.
Bye. Are you there, Linda and Minerva? Yeah. Okay, anything else?
Linda is no longer there. She's moving around.
Oh, okay.
And this is to show my face with power. He thought I'm Benedict Liu.
Yeah, you convinced.
You slot me into your room, right? Oh, good thing I didn't join, man.
I never. We all think you are. We thought you were Ben Liu, not Ben Liao.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Okay lah. Did anything happen in the breakout rooms? Yeah. How did that go?
Okay. I mean, there were questions, so not total silence. So yeah.
Yeah.
I think for mine, I was kind of trying to summarize your points and then kind of answer some of the questions around more from how do you then translate it for a non-Christian?
Yeah. Terry and David, anything?
Mine was the Genesis question.
Okay.
And then about God, he is so powerful, why can't he, or why didn't he just, intervene, so to speak, stop all this evil, or that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Quite serious. I also can answer.
Quite serious. Yeah. Yeah. Genesis, maybe next year we can work on a team. I'm still thinking of a few people. Yeah. David, how did yours go?
Ours was there was a lot of questions around the River Valley incident.
Okay.
And trying to reconcile what happened there.
Yeah.
And so I tried to link it to your last point, that being participants of suffering and how God uses that to reach others and to come alongside others. Because what they weren't aware of was the response of the parents. So they focused on the incident, but they didn't think about the responses of the parents. Actually, I realized our young people focused on the incident, but didn't look at how the Christian parents responded and how they extended grace even to the parents of the boy that killed their child. And it was the same response for the ACSI parents that lost their child to the outdoor incident. Yeah, so I think something to be said there, that when our young people look at some of these incidents, they look at the immediate surface things, but they don't stay on long enough to see what happened after the incident and how people reacted thereafter. Even for my own kids, I think the attention span was very transient. They just focused on the incident and what happened, but they never dwelt on what happened after and how Christians responded thereafter and how the glory of God was brought to bear in the response. And so when we link that, then there's a real context to your last point. Yeah. So that was the focus of our discussion. Another part of the discussion also was they were trying to reconcile how demise can be good. Yeah. And I think they were struggling to try and place the fact that suffering in the time continent of what God sees, like you said, from eternity to eternity is, I think they're trying to grapple with the time continent with that snapshot of suffering. It's not easy to understand. But that was 20 minutes very fast.
Yeah. Okay, as long as we planted some seeds, but I thought that is an interesting thought. That I mean, as you would know, I'm still grappling with how to connect with 14-year-old and below, especially connect with young people in general, but the 14 and below are especially challenging for me. Yeah, so I think that's really good to see that they only catch that first snapshot. And maybe that should also somewhat impact the way that we teach. Yeah.
Maybe just to add to that, because when you went a bit silent, I said, look.
You're frozen.
Yeah, he's really frozen, man.
Yeah, man.
Anyway, my group was O-level, so 16-year-olds, and I think around the upper sec age, still grappling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your group, so that would be Stacy's group, Zhiling and all that.
Yeah, that's right. Zhiling, Stacy, Stella.
Yeah. Then we pray then we will see how. Yeah, quite interesting.
So just a question regarding how many young adults were actually in today's session.
I didn't invite the young adults. I wanted to reserve the thing for you, but some of the young adults came. I think they knew about the session through whatever communication. So there was Dawn, Melvin, and Stacy. Stacy, because she always helps out. Dawn and Melvin, I think, I think they somehow found out. Yeah, which is fine. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Why I ask is because I kind of have a sensing that maybe the young adults can, because of their age, right, may be closer to the youth. So in terms of like relating to them, or the youth may not see them as parents so much as some of us where we are involved. They may look at us more like, you're like my father's friend, you all don't understand me, that kind of thing. So I'm not sure, right? Of course, they may know Uncle David, Uncle Terry, or Uncle Towan, so maybe more familiar. But for some of us as parents, we